Hey there guys, Conceptual Concept 6.9 here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Winter is afoot. This area hasn't been touched too much by snow, but today I wanted to do a video on Wandering Zero with the FLUX Raider. I know multiple YouTubers have mentioned it and said that it is a thing that happens with this platform.
The significance of this, both for the TP9, the FLUX Raider, the 2020 chassis, the USW Glock chassis, and basically the majority of pistol PDW chassis, there is some degree of Wandering Zero due to what I call 7 degrees of optic separations, or Kevin Bacon.
But no one's actually done a test on exactly how bad the Wandering Zero is, if it's serviceable, etc. So that's what I'm planning to address today. So we're going to be doing 3 different tests to just check how the Wandering Zero is affected and how severe it is at the range. So we're gonna do it at 25 yards. The reason why is very simply the accuracy potential out of this. It's gonna be easiest to tell at roughly 25 yards because it's about a 2 to 3 inch gun at 25 yards. And so if I go further, let's say I do a 50 yard test, then suddenly I've got a 4 to 6 inch circle that I have to navigate and see where it's shifting. So I feel 25 is a pretty good medium, a pretty good range to do this test where I can actually kind of tell where the rounds are impacting, shifting, right? So the way we're going to perform it is, first we're going to try applying pressure against the not a foregrip here, and I feel that that is probably one of the most common ways that pressure will be put on this chassis system. So we're going to be doing that, and then we're going to try applying pressure on a barricade upwards, like you're trying to really dig into that barricade. And lastly, which is what I'm the most concerned about, so I'm going to take the chassis system off, put the fire control unit in a pistol grip, fire it about a magazine through the pistol, and then put it back on and see if the zero's shifted as well. Now, I want to note through this testing, this is my particular FLUX Raider with my particular slide and fire control unit. So yours might have varying results from this, but I feel at the very least this gives us some information to work off of that we don't have right now. So I'll see you at the range, okay guys? All right, so we're gonna go ahead and fire the control group. I've got targets out there at 25 yards, 5-shot groups. I'm gonna go ahead and just rest it here. I'm not gonna be putting any pressure on it or anything like that. Just see how we do. It is a 100-yard zero, so I expect it to hit a little low. All right, so that was my original group. You can see this is way far low and left. I zeroed at 100 yards, probably was a little too far for 9mm, so I went ahead and adjusted it to bring it where it's just a couple inches below the target. So that's going to be our control here. This group, keep in mind, about 2 1/4 inches below the target. We're going to move on to the next one. All right, so now that we have our control group, we had to readjust because 100-yard zero with the bullet drop was a little drastic. So now that we've readjusted, let's go ahead and let's torque this guy down on the rest just to see it. And we're not going to be looking for match grade accuracy because I'm giving this quite a bit of force. All right, let's go see. Well, there definitely appears to be a little bit more vertical stringing than the other two groups. I think that's because I was putting pressure directly onto the barricade, so causing a shift up and down. But this is our grouping. Now, the real question is, how drastic is that? That is, goes up almost 2 inches high. Now, part of this might be the deviation, but you can see the general cluster is pretty much in the same spot. I'm just seeing vertical stringing here, which I think is due to the pressure being put vertically, like I was pressing down. So let's go ahead and let's pull into it this time. Let's see how it does. We're gonna aim for this bottom right target here. All right, so again, don't be expecting match accuracy out of this, but I'm gonna be pulling it as tight as I can, and let's see how we do. Bottom right target. All right, let's go see how we did since she's on. I think I saw the bullets starting to go down a little bit, further south than normal. I am seeing the same horizontal dispersion here as I saw out of the first two groups, vertical dispersion out of the one where I was pushing down on the barricade. But you can see here, dropped about an inch lower with that. Now, is that inch significant? Personally, I don't think so. At the ranges you're gonna be shooting this guy, so far, I'd still recommend it. So now let's go ahead and do some shooting with this gun. We're gonna switch over to the pistol system, then we're gonna switch it back to the chassis, and we will see if the zero has shifted. So I thought of something before I wanted to move on to shooting it as a pistol and switching back. I want to verify that the zero is held with pushing down on it. It looks like it has. I'm gonna aim for the bottom left. We're just gonna see how it does. Very, very lightly, I'm not pressing down on anything. All right, let's go check. All right, so as you can see, the zero has held. It's floating right in that same ballpark. This guy's about an inch lower and a little, looks like it's favoring a little more left than the other two. But let's go ahead and shoot this guy as a pistol. Right, so this part's gonna be slightly less exciting. This guy's not zeroed, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pop off the 16 rounds left in the mag. All right, just fired those, and let's put it back on the original chassis, back on this guy, and see if the zero's shifted. All right, so got this guy back in the chassis system here. We got 5 rounds in this magazine. We're gonna aim at the center of the right target and see if anything shifted. Again, very little to no pressure being put on the system at all. Let's see how we did. All right, so looks like we're about an inch lower and an inch more to the left. Now that's a pretty tight group for this gun, so I'm pretty happy with the group, minus that flyer, which is definitely me. But you can see we have shifted from being a couple inches under to being 3 inches under, and the group has shifted to the left a little bit. Now, with something like this, is an inch low and to the left that big of a deal? Personally don't think so. This gun's really not designed to be a very long distance shooter. Really optimistically 100 yards. But let's go to the debrief. Let's talk about it there. All right, so we had some pretty interesting results here, and let's go over it. So initially I fired a control group. I thought it would be a lot closer than it was, but unfortunately it was about 4.5 to 5 inches low at 25 yards. I had this zeroed at 50 yards initially. Now part of that might be because the accuracy potential of this gun is not quite up to snuff to zero at 50 yards reliably, so I might have had a false zero. But it was pretty dramatically low. So I'll insert a picture somewhere up here of that first group. And so I had to re-zero. I zeroed it for about 2 inches low on the target at 25. Should match up pretty close at 50 yards to be a 50-yard zero. But it was suboptimal. So I re-zeroed it. Here's the control group. I'm going to be using this to compare with all the other groups moving forward. As you see, it's about a 2.5 to 3 MOA or 3-inch gun at 25 yards. So really closer to a 10 to 12 inch gun or 12 MOA gun. So next step, because I wanted to test for if you're resting off a barricade, I went ahead and used the rest, and I pushed down with as much force as I could possibly do to shoot the next 5-shot group. I thought this one was really interesting because it definitely shows that the pressure causes the bullets to travel in a different direction. This is the only group that had a vertical dispersion instead of horizontal. I'll put the control group here, and I'll put the vertical dispersion or the press rest group here. It definitely lifted the group up a little bit as well. So we had a little bit of vertical movement and vertical dispersion, which was definitely interesting. You can see how really pressing against a barricade can really affect the zero on the gun. Now that being said, one thing I want to note is you'll see this with non-free float handguards as well. So how drastic is it? Personally, I don't think this is a huge shift. You can see the bottom of the group is pretty aligned, maybe a little high from the group I'm getting with the control group, and it's just going up into the target. Just something you can't get away with anything that's not free float. Even ARs and AKs, if you're resting and putting pressure on, it'll shift the impact. So that was interesting. Then next, I went ahead and pulled the gun into me as much as possible. So I was really cranking into myself there. One thing I noticed there was that the group dropped to almost an inch, roughly an inch. Now, I understand some of that could be just the group dispersion. You know, not everything's gonna be exactly uniform every time you shoot, but roughly an inch at 25 yards. Here's the control group. Here is the group when I'm really pulling the gun into myself. So there's a little bit of shift there as well. Something to be noted, it's about 1 inch at 25 yards, so about 4 MOA shift there. Is that something to be concerned about? With something like this, personally, I don't think so. Something like this is really meant to be a closer range gun, and if you need to take the longer shot, you might need to stop and think, hey, I can't be wrenching down on this gun, right? So I did see a little bit of dispersion there as well, a little bit of wandering zero, if you will, but nothing really to be concerned about. And lastly, the thing that had me the most worried was pulling the gun apart, putting it into pistol form, into a pistol frame, shooting it, and then reinstalling the chassis system. So I went ahead and did that. I only did it once, but I did get a shift in zero, and actually I got a pretty tight group with it, which I was pretty impressed with. All but one flyer was, and I'll insert it right here, was borderline touching. So really good accuracy for a pistol or a pistol chassis system. And it did go shift down and to the left. So it moved about 1 inch down and 1 inch to the left, or 4 MOA down, 4 MOA to the left. Is that something to be concerned about? Yes, in my opinion, absolutely, because every time you are taking this slide off and taking the fire control unit out to insert it into a pistol frame, you're gonna have to re-zero your gun, reconfirm that. One thing I wanna note too is after I did the pressing into yourself and really cranking down on the barricade groups, I went ahead and reshot a group with very minimal pressing of it, very minimal like pressure on the system, and the zeros seemed to hold. Whereas when I took the gun apart and I installed it on a pistol frame, shot it, and then reinstalled the chassis frame, we did have a shift in impact. So every time you switch between that pistol system and the chassis system, you're probably gonna wanna reconfirm zero, and probably gonna need to re-zero your gun, at least slightly. It might need a little bit of tweaks, right? So my personal opinion is, for what this offers, are those trade-offs I'm willing to take. Absolutely. Really, you're not seeing a lot more zero shift or wandering zero with this system than you are just a non-free float AR or AK. It's not a significant difference there, and it seems to bounce back. So when you put that pressure, you fart around with it, it seems to bounce back to being zeroed once you relieve the pressure. So I'm inclined to say this is really a good system. The one thing I don't think it's good for, and I don't think I'm gonna do a video on in the future, is switching back and forth from a pistol to a chassis system. I'd leave it as one or the other personally, and that's just because there's a few limitations. Every time you switch back and forth, you're gonna have to re-zero this chassis system. On top of that, I'm a huge fan of optics on your carry gun, and unfortunately with this system you can't mount an optic to your carry gun. Now you can always mill this off, and I've seen people doing that and running a red dot on their slide. That way they'd be able to switch back and forth. That would also eliminate pretty much all the zero issues that we have, but then you end up with a really, really low, borderline unusable hide over bore. And I just think that you're losing out on the best parts of this system. So personally, my opinion is, if you're gonna run one of these, just dedicate your slide and fire control unit to this system. But one thing to note too is, if you end up cleaning this system or doing anything with it, you're gonna have to probably re-zero it as well. So hopefully this gave you a little more information. I've been hearing from Brass Facts and a few other guys that these have wandering zeros. To me, I just wanted to test it out. I wanted to see how severe the wandering zero was. And I hate to say it, it turned out to be less than I expected. It actually turned out to be very, very similar to a non-free float AR or AK. So I would say it's good to go. And I would say in its size factor, and there's no one over there, but in its size factor, this is hard to beat. I think it's arguably the best PDW system on the market right now, but we'll get into that in a separate video. I'm gonna go over, you know, a dedicated PCC PDW versus this, versus just carrying a larger handgun. And we'll see my thoughts. Now, your thoughts may vary. And last thing I want to note is that this is a sample size of 1. This is one FLUX Raider chassis. This is one SIG P320 FCU and slide system. Yours might act entirely different, but I was just hoping to get a little more information out there because I had heard of the Wandering Zero issue, but honestly, no one put any real information on it other than, oh, it's this thing out in the ether. So we got a little more information today. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And don't forget, go outside, enjoy nature's beauty, and eat that booty. All right, guys?